So this is a major event in Lakota history. It's known as Opawe Chewichaka Sotapi. And in other words, the Battle of the Hundred in the Hand or the Hundred Slain. In American history, it's known as the Fetterman massacre. And it took place during what is known as Red Cloud's War. And those are between the years of 1866 and 1868. The reason it's called Red Cloud's War is because at this time, this man, Mahpia Luta, Red Cloud, he is a member of the Iteshicha Tioshbae, and he was also a Blotahunka. So in Lakota culture, you had a headman, Itrancha, and but during times of war, they had no power. Their power was delegated to a Blotahunka, a war leader, and they made all the military decisions. And so Mahpia Luta at this time was a Blotahunka, and it was his job to defend this territory that was protected under the 1851 treaty. When gold was discovered in Montana, the non-Indians began to try to make shortcuts up to the Montana goldfields, and they would cut through Lakota territory. And this was a violation of that 1851 treaty. And so Mahpia Luta gathered not only other bands of Lakota, but other tribes, the Cheyenne and the Arapaho, to defend that territory and keep the whites out of there. And this brought him in contention with this man named John Bozeman. So John Bozeman was a failed miner who tried to strike it rich, but decided that he could make more money by charging non-Indians on their way trying to get to the gold rush. The 1851 treaty, they had to go all the way around Lakota territory. And so this man, John Bozeman, decided to make a shortcut and charge people. And this is what led to what we call Red Cloud's War. So he started to take a few travelers, and it kind of word of mouth spread that he could cut off a lot of time. And of course, people were anxious to get there and to file a claim and trying to get their gold mines staked out and everything. And so he would actually start around Fort Laramie, and that's at that time Fort Laramie was like the main central post. That's where like all your mail, last time to mail anything or receive mail, to get any goods or supplies. So Fort Laramie was a very important place at that time. That's where he would try to find wagons that were going to be heading up to Montana. Maybe get a couple of them, talk them into grouping together and traveling together. He would charge about $25 a person to escort them up there. Okay, so here you can kind of see the trail itself. It's marked out in blue. That southern route along the Oregon Trail is those red dots at the bottom. The northern route along the Missouri is up there to the top. And you can see how his cut across kind of worked, leaving just north of Fort Laramie with the people he talked into that would be willing to pay for a shortcut, because it did cut weeks off going all the way around. And it traveled, you can see it in the yellow. I just marked it in the red and blue to kind of show it a little bit more. But it actually goes, so any of you that have been to the Bighorn Mountains west of Gillette, you can see that mountain range. So it just traveled right to the east of it, all the way up, and then cut over to Montana. So as expected, there was some attacks starting to happen on some of these travelers that were going along that Bozeman Trail, and especially for some of them that they once they kind of learned the trail system, and people told them kind of how to get there and stuff. A lot of them tried to bypass even paying anybody like to guide them. They figured that they could probably make it on their own by following tracks or following directions. And a lot of them that wandered off or got lost throughout there, there was some attacks on them. There was stealing of livestock, some harassment, some death, and because of that, the government was required to take action and try to maybe come to some kind of settlement with the tribes and about this illegal road. So, because of some of these attacks on the travelers, the government decided that the best solution would be to start constructing small forts that are going to be kind of centered along the Bozeman Trail. And in that way, they could try to keep some form of peace and protect the settlers coming through there, miners coming through there, under the guise that they were going to try to keep them out of those territories. So on around August 1st, 1866, Red Cloud and other leaders were called in by U.S. Army officials to Fort Laramie. And the hope was to discuss some kind of solution to the Bozeman Trail, the Lakota's unhappiness with miners and settlers cutting through that land, disruption of buffalo herds, the construction of forts, and so forth. And so Red Cloud and other leaders that came in to meet with the U.S. Army officials at that time, it wouldn't end well, because Red Cloud would learn while these meetings were going on that the government didn't seem like it really had an intention of removing those forts in Lakota territory. They were actually going to be expanded, and so this caused a lot of frustration on the part of Red Cloud and the other leaders. So that's the kind of role that Red Cloud was playing at these meetings, as being the spokesman for this large group of warriors from all different tribes. The government trying to get them to halt their attacks and to leave settlers, and the government kind of agreeing or pledging that they would remove the forts and try to stop the Bozeman Trail altogether. At that same time that they were promising that, then scouts from the north relayed to Red Cloud that there was a lot more wagon trains that were heading up towards the forts that were already established along the Bozeman. So that's how they knew that they had no intention of removing those forts. They were actually going to start strengthening them, expanding on them. And so this is what angered Red Cloud and his people that were there, that were camped at Fort Laramie. And so they left. They left in anger. One of the main forts that was constructed along the Bozeman was Fort Phil Kearny. And this was like I said, isolated post out in the middle of Lakota territory. And a lot of the soldiers that came there, it was a very different terrain, different people, different way of life than they had known being in the army out in the east. So there are letters from soldiers stationed at Fort Phil Kearny at this time, and because and this goes for most outposts and most forts out west. In these different territories, is everything was made of wood, and you also had to have wood for your corrals. You had to have it for firewood, and so wood cutting crews were always something that every post had to have. And so if they didn't use soldiers for this, then they used civilian contractors that would go out on these wood teams, wood gathering teams. And so there's some letters from soldiers stationed at Fort Phil Kearny that either went out on some of these wood cutting crews or had to help protect them as these men collected wood. And they described how the Lakota or Cheyenne or Arapaho warriors would kind of separate maybe one or two men away from the main group as they were all out cutting wood and stuff. And those men would never be seen again, or they would find their body mutilated or something. So there was a lot of apprehension because the longer that they're there, they kind of had to go further and further away to get more and more wood. So they were constantly uh, threatened by attack. So here's an example of one of the letters from a soldier there stationed at Fort Phil Kearny. And this is in October of 1866. My dear parents, the days pass slowly here at Fort Phil Kearny, and we find little to do except drill and prepare for whatever may come. The Sioux have been stirring in the region, and we are kept on constant alert, but they seem to be more elusive than anything. Sometimes we see them on the ridges or hear their war cries in the distance, but no attacks come. It is as though they are watching us, learning our movements. There are rumors of a major raid, but it is hard to say when or where. I have seen some of their warriors up close during a brief parley at the fort. They are a proud and fierce people. Their faces are painted, and they wear the skins of buffalo and deer, which they hunt on the vast plains. Though they are our enemies, I must admit there is a kind of dignity about them that I do not see in some of our soldiers. I hear talk that the situation may become much worse before it gets better. We are outnumbered and overextended, and I fear the worst. Yours sincerely, Joseph E. DeLong. So you can kind of see that the attitude of some of the soldiers out there. It was a pretty isolated place. They didn't really know their enemy. They didn't know the territory. And that's one thing that comes across in a lot of these letters is the soldiers being uneasy with that fact that they really didn't know the territory at all and kind of felt at a disadvantage. So here's another letter from Sergeant Henry Schofield. This is the following year, 1867. And you can kind of see his attitude about being there. My dear brother, I write you from this miserable outpost where the cold seeps into your bones and the loneliness eats at your soul. The Indians are everywhere. I can't go anywhere without seeing their tracks or hearing the echo of their distant war cries. They are as skilled in the art of ambush as any soldiers I've ever known, and they fight with the ferocity of cornered animals. There is talk among the men of how we should handle them, whether to seek out a fight or wait until they attack. But the truth is, they know this land far better than we do. We can patrol the hills, but they can slip by us without making a sound. The tension between us and the Indians is thick. We are ordered to maintain peace, but I fear the day when the fighting truly begins. We may not be ready for it, and many of the men here are already talking about the possibility of getting cut off or surrounded. It's a grim thought. So these soldiers stationed at Fort Phil Kearny and all their worries and concerns would become a reality on December 21st, 1866, when Fetterman and his men would be wiped out in what would become known as the Fetterman massacre. So Captain Fetterman would be assigned to Fort Phil Kearny in 1866, and he hadn't been there too long. Tensions were already pretty high. There was already a lot of attacks, like I was saying, on the woodcutting crews, and he would be assigned to follow a small group of Lakotas that were spotted not too far from the fort. And it was something that it wasn't totally unseen before, because they would have small um, groups of Lakota warriors that would come out and try to pull them deeper into some of the terrain and ambush them. And so the government knew that this was a technique that was being used, but it is said that that this young captain, he was he was pretty arrogant about his ability to defeat any native tribe. Um, and so when he was kind of tasked to go out there and check out this small group, he took about 80 men with him or so, and most of them were on foot. They were infantry. Um, and so they went to go and try to meet up with this small group of Lakota that were spotted. He was given orders not to go over a certain ridge, and according to historians and stuff, he disobeyed that order and followed the the small group of Lakotas. Crazy Horse is believed to be one of that group that was acting as a decoy to kind of draw them further. Drew them in over that hill where the fort actually lost sight of them, and so in that way, he disobeyed orders, and I guess in the eyes of history, and what led to his being wiped out with his men. So, like I said, the morning of December 21st, they that small decoy group, uh, kind of hung around close to that fort. They could be seen from the fort, and Fetterman and his men were uh, sent out there to try to, locate them, see what they were up to and stuff. Was warned not to go past the certain hill. Don't be drawn in. He didn't listen. They continued on. And when they got up over the hill, a few miles from the fort, is when the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors had been hiding behind rocks and using the terrain. And that's when they sprung their ambush from all sides. Fetterman, his men, they were isolated. They were cut off from the fort. The fort couldn't see them. They could only hear gunshots. Um, they were unprepared for that kind of assault, that kind of ambush. So all of 81 of the Fetterman's men under his command were killed that day. So this battle didn't last for very long, and it was soon discovered after the battle that Fetterman's body had been taken to the camps and drugged through the camps by horseback. Uh, the camps were located about 8 to 10 miles north of this battlefield. So here's an excerpt from Lieutenant John A. Duffy, who was assigned to go to the battlefield after the massacre had happened. And in his letter, in his report, he said, I arrived at the site of the massacre only hours after the attack. The smell of death was unbearable. I saw the bodies of the men who had been cut down by the Sioux, and I could hardly recognize their faces through the blood and the dirt. Some of them had been scalped, others mutilated in ways I had never seen before. The worst thing I witnessed was Captain Fetterman's body. He had been stripped of his uniform, and the Sioux had paraded his body through their camp before leaving it behind in the snow. The sight of a man once so full of confidence and pride reduced to such a state was a reminder of the brutality of this war. There were no survivors from the detachment, only scattered remains and the echoes of what had been a strong unit of men. We had been so sure of our superiority, but we were wrong, so very wrong. The Sioux had outsmarted us at every turn. They knew the land, they knew the people, and they knew how to fight. We were ill prepared. The deaths of these men weigh on my conscience every day. I can't shake the image of their bodies, some of them only partially covered by the snow, and the brutal way they were left behind. We will never forget them. So one of the interesting side note stories for this Fetterman battle was a young man named Adolf Metzger. He was a bugler for the company, and it's interesting because his was one of the only bodies that wasn't mutilated when they were found. In fact, he was found covered up with buffalo robes. And one of the stories is that he had fought so bravely and used all the ammunition that he had, and when he was rushed upon, he actually used his bugle. So this is his actual bugle that was found on that battlefield years later by a cattle rancher, and he used his bugle in the stories that were told by both the Lakotas and the Cheyenne and Arapaho warriors that took part, and said that he used his bugle as a weapon of last resort and was hitting warriors with it before they killed him. And so, to honor him for fighting so bravely, they didn't mutilate his body. They, in fact, covered it up with buffalo robes. And some of the soldiers' reports that went out there to the battlefield after said he looked as though he was sleeping soundly under those buffalo robes. So, just a kind of an interesting side story to that. So, these forts and battlefield memorials are still around. You can visit them. This is the marker that is on the hill where the battle took place, where a lot of the bodies were found. It's not far from Phil Kearney, so if you go to the fort first, they'll give you the maps and stuff, and then you can go across the highway, kind of to the northeast, and you'll see the kind of the direction the soldiers were kind of led by that decoy, and where the bodies were found, and that's this marker that's sitting on top of this hill. So this battle that Fetterman massacred, so this happened early in Red Cloud's War. This happened that first year of it, the December of that first year of 1866. And so these attacks would still continue, not just on Fort Phil Kearny, but on Fort C.F. Smith and Fort Reno as well. But in some of our history, some of the other events, took place pretty close to Fort Phil Kearny, because that was kind of the central fort. So, because of all these skirmishes and the constant attacks and being under threat, this led the United States Army to kind of reassess what they were kind of doing in that area and along the Bozeman. And so, once again, they asked the Lakotas to come in and talk peace. And so this would bring to end the Red Cloud's War. So this is in 1868. So 2 years of first the Fetterman incident, and then a lot of these little skirmishes and being constantly threatened, under attack, costing the government money, etc. So by 1868, they asked the Lakotas to come in to talk peace at Fort Laramie, and this is what will be known as the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868. And so even after the success of getting the government to abandon the forts along the Bozeman, and the establishment of the 1868 treaty, once again, it's going to be the discovery of gold that's going to affect the Lakota and their history. And so within just a few years, in 1874, the rumors of gold that were discovered in the Black Hills would lead another central figure in Lakota history, George Armstrong Custer, to conduct his expedition into the Black Hills in 1874 to verify the rumors of gold. So once again, it would be the rush for gold that's going to lead to further conflict for Lakota territory and their way of life. But those will be for other videos. Chawopila Chichapalona. Hope you learned something about Red Cloud's War.